Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual event conversation on sustainable finance and meeting the needs of future and present generations. This event is hosted by the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance in partnership with Responsible Business Consulting. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Susan Jiroge and I have the pleasure and the honor of being your moderator and host for today's event. Just to kick us off, I would invite you please, as you're joining us, to post your name and your organization and where you're located or your country, just to say hello to everybody, so we can just know who's here with us in the sessions. Thank you. A couple of quick housekeeping rules. We'd love to have all our participants and on video and audio mute, but we definitely do want to have you engaging and interacting with us. So please post your comments, your questions using the Q&A chat function, and we'll try and get to them as quickly as we can as we go throughout the conversation. Hi, Andrew from Lagos. Great that you could join us. We'll also have some poll survey questions running throughout. We invite you please to give your feedback because this will be very helpful to us in shaping our conversations as we go ahead. So I think that's it in terms of the quick housekeeping. Feel free to ensure that you are on audio mute so we don't have too much background noise as we continue this discussion. All right, so as you know, a country's economic stability is wholly dependent on its society. And I think COVID is demonstrating to us very clearly that fact. And at the same time, society is wholly dependent on a natural environment, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the weather patterns that ensure we're actually able to grow the crops that are our food. Climate change, social inequality, access to healthcare, food insecurity, all these things are becoming more and more evident that social and environmental factors are really critical to our country and our nation's prosperity and future. And at the same time, we also know that wherever the money flows, where the money is directed, that's where success and prosperity and investment happens. So in today's conversation, we really want to take the opportunity to unpack with our speakers and our panelists, what is the role of finance in ensuring a sustainable future for us? And to kick us off, I would very much like to welcome the CEO of Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, AVPA, Dr. Frank Aswani, to give us his opening remarks. Frank, over to you and welcome. Frank, could you just double check if your audio is on, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Great. Yeah, thank you. Welcome.
Apologies, I hadn't unmuted myself. So hi, I'm Frank. I'm the CEO of AVPA. Susan, the panelists and attendees, thank you for making time to join us today. This is a really significant conversation as we look to shape the direction in which capital should flow to influence sustainability and impact initiatives on the continent. Financial institutions and deployers of capital are important in shaping how we as the ecosystem support impact initiatives on the continent. This is a beginning of a conversation that we hope we can carry through to action in the mid to long term. And so we're extremely grateful to our panelists and to attendees who've shown an interest in this particular topic. For those who don't know AVPA, we are a network of social investors looking to mobilize capital for impact. We are headquartered in Nairobi with offices in Johannesburg, where I sit, and Lagos. We're part of an international network of sister organizations that include sister networks in Asia, Latin America, and Europe. And we are aligning to address key issues around sustainability and impact investing on the continent. We are super excited with this as part of the initiatives that we're rolling out to address, especially the capacity gaps that are preventing flow of capital into our social investments in Africa. For those of you who are not aware, we have a really exciting opportunity that's also currently running. It's an impact investing fellowship program, and you'll see it up on a slide shortly, and I'll put a link to on the chat. So we've partnered with our Asian sister network, AVPN, and the faculty from the Oxford Side Business School. Can someone please mute? There's some noise somewhere. To partner with, to roll out an impact investing fellowship program, which will bring together 60 fellows, 30 African, 30 Asian. And we are welcoming you to apply for that particular initiative. I think it will be extremely useful for us to have Africans engage with Asians who are solving very similar problems in similar economies. And I think it will be extremely useful and beneficial to those who succeed in making it to the fellowship program. So with that short welcome, I'll leave it to Susan, and I'll let you guys enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for those remarks. And thanks again so much for AVPA in terms of bringing this timely conversation together. I just want to say a quick hello to Adelia from Cape Town. We have colleagues from Lagos. We have colleagues from Ethiopia as well. Thank you so much. Continue to share with us where you're from. Hi, Martin. And of course, we have some colleagues as well from Nairobi. So great that you can be here with us. Our first poll is going to be going up live very shortly. So please feel free to give us your feedback. This will be important for us in terms of understanding what feedback you're giving us, what your thoughts are around the conversation on sustainable finance, and what is the role of the financial and investment sectors. I'd like to now invite our next speaker, who will give the keynote address. This is Professor Amaishi, who is one of the leading scholars on sustainable business and finance in the Global South. He's the chair in business and sustainable development and director of scaling business in Africa at the University of Edinburg. He's also a visiting professor of leadership and financial markets in Africa at the London School of Economics, and also holds the chair in sustainable finance and governance at the School of Transnational Governance, European University Institute in Florence, Italy. Professor Amaishi, welcome for you to share your remarks with our audience.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And good afternoon, everyone, and good morning and good evening where you are. I'm just wondering if I can be allowed to share my slides. If the host can allow me to do that, that would be great.
Yeah, we're going to share them on this side for you, Professor. So just give us a minute, please. Thanks.
Yeah, I would have loved to have control of that myself instead of telling somebody to press off. Is it not possible for me to do it from my end?
Sure, my colleague Abu is just gonna make you have control. He's going to make you a co-host.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
There's some people who have their mics.
I'm able to do it now. That's great. Thank you very much. Always good to be in control of your slides.
Of course. Go ahead.
Yeah. So today, I mean, I've got like 10, 15 minutes, so I will sort of rattle through it, but bear with me. So what I want to do is to position our minds or just challenge us to think through what ESG means in the broader context. So I would explore some contextual issues and possible lessons to be learned from those. So one of the things is to even start with the main question of what is sustainability. Sometimes ESG is another acronym there, but I tend to look at it from a sustainability perspective. And sustainability here for me means more than just the issue of longevity or consistency, continuity, long-term, and if you're in accounting, the whole idea of the going concern. So the man on the street or woman on the street would understand sustainability from this perspective, but it's always good to point to the fact that sustainability in this case is linked to sustainable development, and it's about progressive social, environmental, as well as economic development. And that's one way to help focus the mind on what we are talking about here. There are also different ways of thinking about sustainability. So people think about the triple bottom line, and they think about the connection between economy, society, and environment. But I like this one, which is about the nested relationship, because the first one assumes that the three elements are equal. But in reality, we can understand that without the environment, we don't have society, and without society, we don't have the economy. So the whole agenda around the ESG, or corporate sustainability, is to ensure that the economy is aligned with societal interests and ultimately with environmental concerns. So, but one of the key lessons I want us to grapple with is the idea that sustainability is about impact management. Therefore, ESG is also about impact management. And companies strive to create profit. In the course of creating profit, they create both positive impact, like jobs, consumer welfare, skill development, or infrastructure development. They also create negative impact. But what should they do about their positive impact and their negative impact? And if you think about the ESG conversation, you would probably see that at each point in time, either we are looking in terms of how do we enhance our positive impact, or how do we reduce our negative impact? So for me, that's a good way of summarizing the entire conversation around the ESG, whether you frame it as risk or as opportunities. And I also think that the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not perfect, but they tend to provide us with some ideas on things we can focus on or choose to focus on as we are thinking about our sustainability strategies or our ESG approaches. But there are pressures there. So some of these pressures are coming from investors, really, who are interested in protecting the value of their assets. They can also come from regulators. Most of the financial regulators these days are beginning to encourage companies to think about their sustainability issues. It can also be driven by consumers, although not very much in the African context, but where we can see from other countries or contexts where consumer pressures and even labor pressures are asking companies to do some of these things. But we also have pressures from standards. So, and in this case, GRI, I think is is at the forefront of that, where companies are being encouraged to report. But there are also some global trends. So whether you're looking at your pension fund in South Africa, for example, or whether we're looking at it from Netherlands, where the Dutch pension funds are now embracing sustainable investment, or you look at your UNPRI, integrated reporting. So these are all global trends that are pushing towards ESG and sustainability, or you think about your carbon disclosure project as well. We also have the UNEP-FI as something out there, also encouraging banks in this case to think about their impact on society and how they can contribute to enhancing societal benefit. We also have the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. I like them because they're trying to challenge banking and provide alternatives to banking by saying that they can only invest in the real economy. And there is research evidence to support that they're even doing, they're much more profitable than your conventional banks. So it's one to look into for those who are interested in. We also have the Sustainable Banking Network, which is driven by the IFC. And I can see some people here, like the Kenya Bankers Associations, a member of this Sustainable Banking Network. We also have the Nigerian Central Bank also as a member. Also, what is happening in the stock exchange? The Nigeria Stock Exchange is also pushing the idea of sustainability. I've already mentioned the Kenya Bankers Association and what they are doing in that regard, and they remain a flag bearer as long as Africa is concerned. Bank of Ghana also recently adopted the Sustainable Banking Principles, and they launched it about last year or so. In South Africa, it's also there. You have the South Africa Sustainable Finance Initiative. So these are different pressures coming from that global agenda. But the question for me is, to what extent is ESG a credible and reliable solution? I think it's something we also need to pay attention to. As much as these trends are out there, let us also not take it for granted that it's kind of a smooth transition. One of the key problems that still exists is the issue of trust. To what extent do we trust private companies who are largely driven by their self-interest to protect or to be interested in the interests of society or the environment? I think that has always been a critical point. How do we restore trust to the system? And maybe ESG could be one of the ways of doing that. But there are tensions. And some of the tensions I see are built around what I call the tension between environmental and social sustainability. In the global north now, for example, the whole idea of sustainability is framed as an environmental issue. It's about climate change, and you can see a lot of money going into green issues, climate finance, and so on and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you put it in the African context, yes, the environment or the climate change is an issue, but we also have pressing problems like health issues, poverty, education, poor education infrastructure, good governance, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the tensions I see, and I believe that in Africa, we need to find a way to create that balance. There is also the tension between what I call profit on one hand and purpose. So yes, profit matters, but people are also arguing that there is room for purpose. But how then do we square the circle in that sense if we are pulled in different directions? There is also the tension between top management and your average sustainability professional who wants change, who wants to move the company in a particular direction. But what I found happening is that in many companies, the top management is still yet to appreciate sustainability, maybe because they did their management education when sustainability was not topical. But we see this happening on a daily basis. There is also the tension between what I call the local and the global. So I've shared with you some of the local global trend, but there are also some local trends. But to what extent do we reconcile the global pressures with the local reality?
Right.
There is also the tension between long-termism and short-termism. So you might be talking about long-term, maybe long-term is 20, 25 years or 30 years. But for another person, long-term is just 5 years. So what is that tension between short-term and long-term is still yet to be resolved. But there's also the tension between voluntary compliance on one hand or regulation on the other hand. Many organizations or companies would want to kick against regulation and they would like to do things themselves. But at the same time, self-compliance or voluntary compliance might not be radical as regulation may be. There is also the tension between risks and opportunities. On one hand, we are thinking about, how do we manage our risks? And companies that frame it as such are very much limited in their scope. Others may also see it as opportunities, but then how do we reconcile the two? How do we see both risks as well as opportunities? Others think about their negative impact and they want to reduce negative impact as much as possible. Others think about their positive impact. But what happens here is that no amount of positive impact can remove your negative impact. So if you're an oil and gas company and you keep investing in your local community, hoping that you're creating positive impact, but the core of your business still has negative impact, how would that be reconciled by investors as they decide whether to invest in your organization or not? There is also the tension between what I call the holistic and the partial view of sustainability. Some people can bracket ESG and say, this is the ESG portfolio, but the overall portfolio of the organization is, to a large extent, excluded from such ESG criteria. Then you can also think about whether you want to go it alone or collaboration. And this is very, very important and something to consider, because some of these things we are asking for may not require an individual organization to solve. So you need a collective action to drive the kind of change we want to see. But fundamentally, I also see the gap between thinking and doing. If you ask many people on this call, we understand the thinking behind this, but the problem comes right when we start to implement. The doing, because of the gap between thinking and doing, we always have this tension because when you go into practice or the implementation, there could be pressures from profit, from competition, from regulation. And if the two are not aligned between, the two here being the thinking and the doing, then we are in problem. So I don't know whether I need to go into this, but just quickly, one of the things I found through mainstreaming responsible investment is the problem of quantification. And the earlier speaker that talked about impact investing can maybe relate to this idea, because what it can quantify, you can manage. And if you're able to quantify, then you're able to place a price on it, which is a singularization. And if you're able to place a price on it, then you can exchange that price, then that product can travel. So if ESG needs to work and be mainstreamed in Africa, for example, we need to be able to quantify it. Data matters. If you're able to quantify it, we also need to be able to place a price on the data we collect or the information we gather on companies, and then we should have platforms through which we can trade them. So that's where reporting, for example, comes in. And reporting helps to build trust, as I've mentioned earlier on. It's also a way of highlighting inefficiencies organizations can deal with, and it can also be a source of innovation. So reporting, the true sense of it, is not just about accountability, but it can help organizations identify areas they can improve on. So I know I've kind of rushed through it because I have limited time, but I thought to bring some of these big questions on the table, and probably they can guide our conversation this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I think that was a very insightful, especially for me, around the various tensions that you raised. There were quite a few. And I think the one that strikes me the most is the tension that exists between having the international tensions and expectations from stakeholders, and really for us to understand what is being done for us here on our continent and a local context. And it's great to see that, you know, South Africa and Ghana are already starting to make some steps in that direction. So I'll ask you please to stay on screen. We would like to now move into the panel conversation, where I'll be inviting a group of distinguished panelists to take us further into a deeper dive conversation around sustainable finance. Just a quick reminder to everyone, our polls are running now. Majority of you have said so far that your biggest ESG challenge is around governance, and then social, and then environmental. So, Professor, it seems that what you were raising around the social and environmental tensions when you look at our Africa context is also coming out as well in the poll. So continue please to give us your feedback. I'll now welcome our panelists to join us, because in this session, we want to dig deeper into understanding how is it that today social investors and the financing sector are ensuring that funding is driving sustainable development. So Professor Amaechi, you already know, he'll be one of our panelists. I'd like to invite now Mr. Nzomo Mutuku, who's the CEO of Kenya Retirement Benefit Authority. If you could please join us on video, thank you. Our next panelist as well is Dr. Habil Olaka, who's the CEO of Kenya Bankers Association. Habil, welcome, great to have you here. Next is Mabinti Koroma Moore, who's the Outreach and Engagement Lead for Africa in Sustainable Finance for the UN Global Compact. Welcome, Mabinti. And Donald Gibson, who's the Environmental, Social and Governance Impact Manager at CDC Group, the UK's Development Finance Institution. Welcome to all of you, and it's great to have you here with us. Professor, maybe I can start with you, just building on the slides that you shared with us. When we talk about sustainable finance, it can be understood to mean so many different things. Yeah, the health of the business, are we collecting our money in the right way? Are we following the legal infrastructure in the right way? Are we paying our taxes? Or on the other hand, even, does my business have access to long-term capital? So when we're really talking about socioeconomic development, what do we mean by sustainable finance, and why is it becoming so important now?
I think that's a very good question, and one that you may also have different views about, right? So I am inclined to think that sustainable finance is an extension of the view that sustainability needs to speak to some business case. Sustainability initially, to a large extent, was framed as something extra, and it's about doing something like going the extra mile, or even in some instances, it was seen as a form of tree hugging. So, sustainable finance is, we need to make it much more acceptable to the markets and to the business community by saying, well, what does it mean for performance? What does it mean for profit making, and so on and so forth? And that's where we are at the moment largely. So people are beginning to say, what is the link between ESG and the performance of companies? And if I'm convinced about the performance, then it might help others to also start looking into it. And that's how competition comes in and eats off the profit. But one way I want to think about it, and probably move the conversation forward, is to think about sustainable finance as a way of addressing market failure. Right? And that's a conversation that's often not had. Why do we have market failure? There are certain things the market in itself is not able to price, unable to factor in, or some advantages that markets might create for entrepreneurs that are not necessarily good for society. And sustainable finance becomes one way to fill in those gaps. So it might be in the sense of, how do we deal with competition, for example? How do we deal with information asymmetry? Because when it comes to investors taking advantage, or when a manager is taking advantage of investors, it's all about information asymmetry. So, but somebody can say, well, all we need to do to solve the problem is to design the market in different ways, create different incentives for managers and investors and so on and so forth. And when you create those incentives, then we begin to fill in the gaps. So, but if you focus our mind on the market failure question, probably it can help us appreciate the role of sustainable finance in society, and also help us think through some of the solutions we may want to bring forward.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. I can see there are a couple of questions already starting to come through. So to the audience, please do post your questions in the chat and the Q&A. I'd like to do a round first with our panelists and then draw in the questions that you're sharing with us in the chat and Q&A function. Habil, if I could come to you next, please. So obviously the banking sector plays such a critical role in driving sustainable finance. From your perspective, where does Kenya's banking sector currently stand today when we're talking about sustainable finance? Please unmute your audio, Habil.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that head up, Susan. I think that's a very important question in terms of where we are on our sustainable finance journey. And I would just like to take a few words from Professor's presentation. And one of them was, he expounded on the tensions and gave a number of them. And it's actually from there that we did build up our sustainable finance initiative journey, because we clearly realized the fact that given those tensions and the need to balance between business goals for the banking sector, and each of the individual banks have got their business goals vis-a-vis the economy's future forecast priorities, and on the other hand, the socioeconomic concerns that were clearly emanating. The need to balance that was becoming very critical. And it was quite clear to us that if we don't do it, somebody is going to impose it on us. It can be the regulator, it can be the legislative arm, it could be, and we realized that if we let it be driven by an external force, be it the regulator or the legislature, it will not be to our liking. And we have experienced that before in the banking sector. We know the interest capping law, we know a number of regulations that emanate from the regulator. So we are quite aware of that. And we thought we need to be proactive. And so we did come up with the need to create a level playing field for the banks to be able to align themselves to whatever framework we put in place. So the first step was to come up with guiding principles that will create a level playing field for the banks. And we call this Sustainable Finance Initiative Guiding Principles, which there's a whole process which I'll not go into, but eventually they were taken up by the industry and adopted as guiding principles for the industry. And the next stage now was to build a capacity for the banks to be able to implement those guiding principles. And this, we put up an e-learning platform that has been fairly successful. As we speak today, we have had 36,000 employees from the banking sector who have accessed this platform to be able to acquaint themselves or to gather the skills required to be able to support the banks in terms of what we talked about, balancing between the business goals with the economy's future priorities and the socio-economic concerns in the industry. And I think we have seen quite a remarkable improvement in terms of the mindset for the staff, in terms of the need to balance the profit, people, and the planet, if you want to look at it that way. And recently we did release a study on the state of the sustainable finance in Kenya's banking industry. And from the study, it's quite clear that banks are really taking up their role seriously. And for instance, we had a revelation of the fact that 85.7% of the bank's credit policies ensure responsible and sustainable lending that promotes Kenya's sustainable economic development. This report also revealed that 71.4% of banks developed policies that promote optimal management of the financial resources and the natural capital. So clearly, this was an indication of the fact that we as a banking industry are actively lending responsibly by factoring in the impact on the society, the economy, and the environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Habil. So the banking sector has already started, and you're building that awareness with the banks and the staff, and so ESG is starting to be integrated into their credit policies. I think that's a great starting point, taking into consideration how fast sustainable finance is evolving for the industry, and finance being one of the oldest industries or sectors that exist in the world, therefore perhaps even the harder one to shift in that direction. So kudos to you and the KBA for the work that you're doing. Mabinti, if I could come to you, the Global Compact is the largest private sector movement around corporate responsibility. What are some of the key issues or trends that you see that are driving sustainable finance, first in Africa and then potentially globally as well?
Thank you for that question, Susan. It's truly a pleasure to be here and have this conversation, and informed by Professor Meshi's points around the importance of positive impact and measuring. For United Nations Global Compact, I serve on the Sustainable Finance team, and we found that a number of corporates are the missing link to really addressing some of the financing gaps. When we look at trends around impact investing and SDG-linked investment instruments, we're seeing that more is focused on how can we democratize more of these investments across the continent in a more material way that delivers both impact and also strong financial performance. If we look at trends, what is emerging is this greater accountability, especially as we get closer to 2030, and we think about how can we improve or advance the SDGs. Some of the conversations that are emerging here, what are the investment instruments that align with the needs in emerging and frontier markets? Looking at how can we improve access to resources across the value chain. And so what's also emerging are strategic partnerships. So for the UN Global Compact, our sustainable finance team works in close closely with CFOs of some of the leading global corporates. And this is through our CFO task force. When we think about the SDGs, particularly SDG 17 around partnerships, what we are seeing are emerging with the corporate space, with investors, as well as other organizations and stakeholders that are committed not just to articulating commitments, but taking action. Guided by some of our SDG principles around establishing and articulating a clear SDG impact thesis and a measurement strategy. It's also about integrating the SDGs into your overall investment strategy, integrating it in the way you're doing corporate finance. And also when we talk about accountability, what are the mechanisms? And I think that corporations and investors are reporting out or getting more open about how they're performing against the SDGs and integrating ESG factors into the way they invest and the strategies that they're developing, as well as reporting. I think the biggest challenge is around disclosure. And I think that there's greater accountability, not just through civil society, but also even in the corporate and investment space. How are we measuring this impact? Not just the positive, but also what are the negative or unintentional impacts that we're seeing in the market play out. Other trends that are emerging in terms of the development of investment instruments are SDG-linked bonds. Are something that more corporates, specifically CFOs, are working on and structuring. When you think about the role of CFOs, they collectively manage nearly $14 trillion, of which $7.5 trillion is in emerging markets. And so if we think about that access to capital, how can we unlock that? And so I think that through the engagement of corporate CFOs, financial institutions, it's helping to drive change and greater awareness of where these gaps exist, which is only exacerbated by the current pandemic that we're all navigating. And so I think those conversations are coming to the fore, but being greater degree of transparency is one that we're seeing more corporates and investors taking the lead on.
Thanks, Mabinti. It's interesting to know that we are in the good hands of CFOs in terms of determining our future. I think also Global Compact, you produced a report or a guide from CFOs for your network around sustainable finance. Perhaps you could just post that in the chat in case the link to it, in case anybody wants to have a look, and we may have some CFOs on the webinar who might be curious to find out more about the work that you're doing. Thank you.
No, I'm happy to share. Thank you. Happy to share that.
Great, thanks. Zomo, if I could come to you, I think it ties in well with what Mabinti was talking about, investment as a key avenue around sustainable finance. So in your role as the CEO of the Kenya Benefits Retirement Authority, what are your current priorities, or what is the direction of pension fund investment in Kenya today? And are you already using sustainable finance approaches?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon or good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. Yes, we as RBA, Retirement Benefits Authority, we are the regulator for the pensions industry in Kenya. So we supervise the pension schemes and then the way they operate and invest and so on. Now in Kenya, we have quite a well-developed pension industry. The total assets is around $14 billion or so, which is quite high by African standards outside of South Africa. And we have a large number of schemes. We regulate over 1,250 schemes. And we have all types of schemes in Kenya, what we call defined benefit, defined contribution, pension, provident, umbrella, individual, all kinds. So we have a pretty well-developed pensions industry in the country. Now, these schemes have invested in a diversified portfolio, different asset classes. And if I can just quote a few areas, out of the 14 billion, around 44% of it is in government securities, the fixed income securities issued issued by government. And then we also have quite a bit in the quoted equities in the stock exchange, which will be very relevant for what we are discussing, which is around 10% of assets. We have investments also in real sector, in real estate, in private equity funds, insurance companies, in private sector bonds, a little bit offshore, in real estate investment trusts and so on. So a very well diversified portfolio with different kinds of investment. Now, of course, pension schemes, their business is providing returns to members. Pension schemes, the money belongs to members who are saving for their retirement. So schemes are generally conservative investors relative to other investors in the economy. Also, they have a lot of focus on maximizing returns so that the members can get more when they retire. And again, the way our pension system works, which is common in a lot of African countries, is that we have a board of trustees who is responsible for the scheme, and then they appoint fund managers who do the investment. So trustees, again, by their nature, because they have a fiduciary responsibility, tend to be very cautious investors. So what does that mean in terms of sustainable investment? I think schemes are now more and more becoming cognizant of the importance of sustainable investment. In Kenya, we have not gone as far as South Africa, which requires schemes to explicitly take into consideration sustainable, sustainability issues when investing. But we have done the first step, and that is to require our pension schemes to disclose what is their policy when it comes to sustainability in investment. So we want them to tell us, this is where we stand on this. And then I think as we go forward, we'll bring on more measures. I know Habil said that I want the regulators to be the ones to drive the agenda. So as we shall see how it develops, we shall see what they will be disclosing. And then we can consider possibly going the South African route of having an explicit requirement to take into account sustainability. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I think it's fantastic that you're pretty open about. It's very early days for you as the RBA in terms of learning how to one, disclose, but also what the next steps are around ESG. So again, it's a huge industry, and everyone's cautious about their pensions, but I think it's really important that yourselves as leaders are looking down that space to see what can be done to influence that. So thank you for that feedback. Habil, I just want to give you a quick shout out from Margaret Kimani from SBM Bank, who congratulates the KBA for the great work you're doing on ESG in this space. So you have their support there. I thought I would mention that to you. So thank you. Donald, if I can come to you. So the CDC is the UK's development finance institution, but you also refer to yourselves as an impact investor. Now, most people will think, maybe angel investor, venture capitalist, small size are the impact investors, and not necessarily an organization like the CDC group. When you use that term impact investing, does that mean that you're prioritizing the environmental, social, and governance criteria when you're financing large-scale development or small-scale development projects?
Susan, thank you very much for the question. And for those who aren't familiar with CDC, we're the UK government development finance institution, really investing in Africa and South Asia across a range of financial instruments, such as direct equity, debt, intermediated equity, and a range of other flexible instruments. As a DFI, we're investing for development impact. That's really the mandate. We measure success really in two ways. First, we're looking at whether the businesses we invest in have a positive economic, environmental, and social impact. So that's very important. And second, we're looking at how commercially sustainable and successful that business, that investee might be. And of course, these two measures of success, impact on the one hand, ESG on the one hand, and financial return on the other hand, go hand in hand, so to speak. And to create long-term impact, a business must, of course, be financially sustainable, because if it isn't viable and it fails, then this can have negative impact consequences for a range of stakeholders, workers, suppliers, its customers, and particularly those that are most vulnerable. And what that means is when we invest, the potential development impact and the commercial viability of the business, as well as our ability to make a positive contribution as a DFI, all need to be very much aligned. And so, you know, our approach to impact, we are one of the oldest DFIs and impact investors, certainly in Africa. And we've developed a very rigorous approach to integrating ESG and impact into our investment decision-making and portfolio management processes. And let me take you through that quickly, because I think it's important to understand the integration there. Making the decision is obviously the decision to invest. And so we will originate deals that are brought to our attention by sponsors, third-party contacts, etc. And if it's seen as initially viable, then the deal team, which includes specialists from both our investment teams and our impact teams, conducts further research to decide whether it should be put before our investment committee, which is a very important accountability structure within CDC. The deal team then works closely with the potential investee to carry out due diligence and deal structuring and examining how the prospective investment might meet or not our criteria and expectations, and to understand opportunities for impact. A very important part of that is putting together an impact dashboard, which really articulates the impacts that we expect to achieve and directly links those impacts to the investment to the SDGs. And so part of this process is evaluating the investees' environmental, social, governance systems and practices, along with a range of other issues which we often go into deep dives on, such as climate change, such as gender, such as job quality, skills, leadership, and a range of others that are suddenly emerging and that we're faced with. We then present the findings to the investment committee. And if the committee then makes the decision to go ahead with investment, meeting the criteria, we then, you know, embark on the legal agreements with the sponsors. Of course, after approval is very important as well from an ESG perspective. So we work very closely with the investees to put in place steps identified before the investment to ensure that the company or the fund, if it's an intermediated investment, aligns with our standards. And these may include environmental social action plans, business integrity plans, governance structures or strategies to enhance the development impact. And we have very rigorous monitoring processes to monitor the portfolio performance on a regular basis across a range of criteria. And by tracking that performance, we can then identify where we need to add value or to intervene. So, Susan, that is kind of an outline of the process that we've developed over a range of time, and it's guided by international frameworks like the Global Impact Investing Network, OPIM, the Operating Principles for Impact Management, the Impact Management Project, and a range of other partnerships that we've been intimately involved in setting up.
Great, thank you, Donald, for that context setting on how the CDC looks at defining what to invest and what not to invest in. I'm going to now draw out some questions that are coming through from the audience. Kenneth, there's a question here from Asma, who actually sent it really early when you began your keynote address. and she wanted to ask you to please clarify when you were talking about the tensions, if you could just talk more about the gap between orientation and practice.
Okay, that's fine. By orientation, I mean that how people translate sustainability into practice is also a function of their worldviews, right? If you consider those important, then it will inform and shape how you go about it. If you see them as just opportunities or risks to be managed, it will also inform and shape where you place it. So I give you an example. I'm doing some work with some banks where it is largely framed as a risk management exercise. You see the ESG as part of the risk management team. And when you put it there, you've always signal that it's all about managing risks. So it inhibits them from going the extra mile. So it's just about how do we comply to regulation, to the legal requirements, and so on and so forth. But in another situation where it is seen more as opportunity, then it can help unlock opportunities. Say, for example, financial inclusion. It could also be in terms of coming up with innovative financial products that will help both the investors as well as the consumers. So that's what I mean by the fact that the orientation informs and shapes the practice of it. But the other thing, which is also quite worthwhile noting, is that if we talk to the average person, we would see sustainable finance, ESG, as a nice thing to do. But the problem is in translating that nice thing to do into action. Because when you get there, you will run into different challenges. So it could be that your management might be interested in profit no matter what, and also the management cycle might be short. Say, for example, the CEO has only 5 years as a tenure, and you're coming out with an agenda, ESG agenda, that will be more like a 20-year opportunity. So why would that CEO buy into that idea? So it could also be the fact that you want to do it, but competition is not ready yet. And I guess that's where the lines of Kenya Bankers Association are quite useful in the sense that they help to create that level playing ground that will favor everyone to participate in it. I think that's what I'm trying to suggest by the fact that there is a link between orientation and practice. On one hand, it's about your worldview. On the other hand, it's more like the practical realities and the stumbling blocks that might constrain anyone that has very good intentions. And as is always said, the road to hell is paved by many good intentions.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Kenneth. You mentioned KBA, and Habil, there's actually a question here for you from Angela Wairimo. If I can just read it out from the chat. It says, KCB became one of the first banks to be accredited the Green Climate Fund to fund green projects. SMEs are a great player in the green projects, but are unable to access capital. Do you think such GCF funding should avail cheaper loans, and how can KBA plug into facilitation and development of policies enabling the private sector to access the GCF fund?
Is that for me?
That's for Habil, since it's a Kenya-specific KBA question. Okay, so great. The pressure is off for now, Professor.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think that's a very important question, and indeed we are very proud of KCB. You mentioned the fact that KCB is one of the banks that has been accredited to the fund. Let me say that KCB is so far the only private sector entity within Eastern Central that has been able to be accredited to that fund. The other one in Kenya is NEMA, the National Environmental Management Authority, which also has got accreditation, but of the private sector is only KCB so far. And they are now able to access, I think, to the tune of $25 million, from the fund, which they can channel into green projects. Now, the good thing about this is the fact that, and the question was about, could then SMEs be able to access the funding? And you mentioned access, plus also the fact that the cost element, where it is affordable finance, and indeed this is possible. The only thing there is the fact that KCB had to go through an accreditation process, not lengthy, but still, I think it took them, I'm not sure, maybe about 2 to 3 years to be able to fulfill the requirements for accreditation. But it shows the fact that the other banks can also be able to go through the same journey and get accredited. And when you are accredited, then you're able to access this funding that is not only cheaper, but aligned to the green economy. And especially in this period when you're talking about recovery from the COVID-19 effects, and the banking sector being the driver towards supporting the SMEs to be able to pull the economy out of the ravages of COVID-19, I think such funding becomes absolutely critical. And so my encouragement would be for a number of the financial institutions to go through the accreditation process so they can be able to access this funding and therefore support the SMEs, especially those that are in the green space.
Great. Thank you, Habil. I think that really captures the question and encourages others to take the steps towards the GCF funding. There's a question here which from Vivek Mittal. Maybe Mabinti, I'll direct this one to you. It says, where should the balance lie for a company between profit and do no harm and do good?
Where should it lie? I think it starts off with really clearly having an impact thesis, or really clearly laying out what your intentions are. So you want to avoid risk, but you want to do more than that. You want to be intentional about generating positive material impact. What you can measure over time. And I think it's about both. And I think sometimes the myth is that because you're impact oriented, you sacrifice on financial performance. And so I think that there are many examples that are emerging that are shared by organizations like the Global Impact Investing Network. Even with the CFO task force, there are many examples where when you integrate ESG, when you prioritize impact, it's actually, there's a business benefit to that. It's an added value. And sometimes I think the narrative that we're telling ourselves is that you lose out, that there's a sacrifice there. But I think it's about being intentional. It's about being able to really assess kind of where you are. I think sometimes the first step is, what is an assessment of my company? What are we doing towards impact? Are we actually negative? Are we positive? Are we unintentional? Are we knowledge about it? So it's really having visibility of your impact against your financial performance. It's kind of looking at who are you hiring? Who are you working with? Are you promoting gender equality through your hiring practices? Are you serving historically marginalized communities? And then once you have an assessment of your organization, then begin, you have articulated your clear baseline, and then you're able to identify, well, as an organization, as a company, how do we want to achieve impact that will help us and help the communities and our consumers. So it's being thoughtful about that process in terms of how do you measure that. There are many tools and resources in the marketplace. So some were mentioned already by our panelists. GRI, there's the Principles for a Responsible Investment. There is the Impact Management Project, which provides guidance on how do you kind of harmonize your reporting, looking at not just avoiding harm, but also benefiting stakeholders and contributing meaningful and positive, impactful solutions and interventions. So I think it's a process of really assessing at the company level where you are, really articulating an intention that aligns with where you want to improve, and then taking practices and processes and deploying that within your company to get to a level of positive impact across your value chain, and also see how you can perform and improve performance, your financial performance over time. It's certainly an iterative practice. I'm not suggesting that it's one that is easy to do, but it's certainly worth taking that journey to be more impactful. We've seen corporates do it. We've seen even at SMEs who are starting out that are beginning to integrate impact practices to improve their overall company performance. So hopefully that answers the questions, and certainly more detail.
Yeah, Thanks, Mabinti. Just a reminder to everyone who's on the call, please ensure that your audio is on mute, especially when you're joining in, and please stay on mute throughout. We're going to use the chat function to engage and share in the conversation with you. Thanks for that. I have
Susan?
another question. Yes.
Okay, I don't know if we've got time, but can I add to that?
Yes, please go ahead, Donald. Yes.
Thanks very much. I mean, Mabinti's outlined a very nice process for considering the various options in the question that was asked. But I think taking down to a more practical level, you know, for example, if you in your business in a manufacturing plant are experiencing regular injuries, fatalities even, that then results in a business impact, right? So it's not only about the individuals that are affected, but it results in a business impact. And the business impact might be, you know, depending on the country and the regulatory regime, it might be operational shutdowns through government issuing directives for investigations. If we look at energy and water use in many locations, those are scarce resources. They cost a lot of money to buy for your business. So if you have energy saving efficiency programs, that results in an operational cost saving. In many jurisdictions, social license to operate is hugely important for the ability of the business to continue operating. So relationships with stakeholders, communities, directly impacted communities around plants, around operations need to be strong, because, you know, certainly in South Africa, we have, you know, a number of protests, and lots of the sectors and the companies are faced with protests and industrial action on a regular basis. So, you know, the myth is very much there that it's an either-or situation. It's not an either-or situation. Many of our investees are seeing serious business benefits from managing ESG in a structured and a proactive way.
Yeah, thanks for that, adding that, Donald. I think it also, you know, ties maybe to some of the tensions that Professor mentioned earlier, and really saying, where is your business going to be in the next 10 years when you're looking at certain risks around your business, be it your raw materials, be it from a social context. If you're a company that wants to exist in the future, then paying consideration to some of these trends that may seem like nice to do's now, but may actually become societal or environmental challenges 10 years down the line, is important to take that in today. So thanks for adding that context of, you know, the reality of your business now and for the future as well. There's a question here from Stephen. Kenneth, maybe I'll pose this question to you, and any other panelists who'd like to comment on it can. The question is, what role do you see tech companies playing and specific futuristic technologies like AI, artificial intelligence?
Yeah, if I have an answer to that, I will become a millionaire overnight, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, but there is this whole conversation now around tech for good, right? So information IT sector, or artificial intelligence in particular, can help in promoting good behavior. And also all this whole conversation around behavioral science and what behavioral science can help us do. So one way is to make sustainability adoption in organizations more, how will I put it? I mean, easier for people, right? In the sense that, think about your sensors. You walk into a room, it identifies somebody is there and the light comes on. And if there are ways we can also integrate AI into data collection, because we are not good at that as human beings. So yes, but sustainability or ESG is highly dependent on data. And that's part of the problem, even if you look at it from an African context. So if you have the like of Donald now trying to make a decision, you know, what would they rely on? So can AI also help us with data collection, right? So that's one way to look at it. And then the other way is also to think about the positive use of it. But the danger there is, the ability to also misuse or abuse artificial intelligence, where people are becoming too cautious in terms of, sometimes we don't even know what the computer is saying about me at the moment, right? So it might be picking up information from me. So the ethical dimension of it. And that's where probably we need to reflect more on that morality question. How is technology controlling us, and to what extent are we free from being manipulated? Think about the scandal that Facebook and the likes and social media went into when it comes to politics, for example, democracy, and how they tend to shape people's opinions, and all this whole thing about fake news, misinformation, post-truth world. To what extent can actors in this place, because they are also fundamentally businesses, if you see my point. And whatever we are talking about responsible business practices will also apply to the tech giants or anyone playing in that space. But at the same time, they can also help do better things in society. Think about your fintech, your digital economy. So there is a role for it. Think about even the COVID thing, the problem now we are all relying on Zoom and the like. So these are positive impacts tech companies can also create in society. But I think it's a balancing act. And as long as we have strong regulation to manage some of the negative impacts and promote positive externalities.
Great, thank you. Audience, just to remind you that we have our polls running. Please do give us your feedback. This will be really helpful for us as we look at the next steps around these conversations on sustainable finance and really truly what matters to yourselves and your organization. So please do share your feedback with us on the polls, and we'll come back to them as we move along to just see how the conversations are shaping. Habil, I just wanted to ask if you also wanted to comment perhaps on the tech question, as Kenneth also talked about fintech and digital economy. Is there anything you may wish to add to the question of what role tech can play around sustainable finance and ESG? I think maybe Habil, I'm not sure if I've lost you, so I'll move on. There's a comment here from John Nganga, who says, would a switch from viewing ESG as a compliance to reporting requirement to a tool that assists resource mobilization, portfolio quality improvement, and reduced physical and transition risk improve company and bank level adoption of ESG? I think that's a yes, because I think like Professor said right at the beginning, you can look at ESG from a risk perspective, but you can also look at it as an opportunity perspective. And that's how organizations should start looking at ESG factors. To our panelists, I just want to maybe shift the conversation a bit towards getting a sense of what more is it that we need to be doing within the investment and financial sector to really drive and deliver sustainable finance for our continent and for our markets. Mabinti, maybe I'll start with you. In your opinion, how should entrepreneurs or companies change the way they measure success so that businesses can steer away from the wrong outcomes, i.e., negative social, environmental, or governance impact?
Yeah, I think it's first, businesses defining success using an impact lens, and also thinking that it's imperative to integrate really intentional and meaningful impact practices in order to improve your business overall. I think sometimes when we think about impact or ESG, it's always through a lens of, well, this is what I'm required to do, but not seeing the full benefits in terms of improving business decision-making. So one, it's for a company to be intentional about, and I always talk about this emphasis on intention. about what are the positive impacts that they want to see, and starting early and not after the fact. So begin the process. It's going to be iterative, but for example, if we're looking at improving gender diversity across a company, thinking about how can we improve our hiring practices, how can we provide greater opportunities for women and men across the value chain of our companies. And then in terms of measurement, it's oftentimes a question that I receive, or that generally in the impact spaces you receive, how do I begin this process? So there are a number of publicly available resources that companies can start with. So one is Iris Plus, which is a tool developed out of the Global Impact Investing Network. It is a publicly available tool that provides guidance on metrics organized by different themes and sectors, as well as additional guidance that's provided by the Impact Management Project. So first is taking and doing assessment of your company. Where is the impact? And sometimes companies aren't consistently tracking their impact performance, and some will be surprised that you've actually been more impactful than you thought, but it's really taking steps to begin the practice and being consistent about it. But also noting where, when you integrate ESG, when you are intentional about articulating your impact goal, that it does impact your business overall, even financial performance. So I think it's for companies to kind of start those steps in terms of how can I really have greater visibility of how we're contributing either negatively or positively to the community that we're serving. Also factoring in how can we serve more low resource communities through our products and services. And then starting that process for yourself, not just as a result of I'm getting an investment, so therefore I have to report. That is a requirement, but also being intentional as a company, integrating it throughout all levels of your organization is a best way of really telling your success story through an impact lens, but also looking at financial performance. So I would say start early. There are tools and resources that are publicly available. I can certainly share links to, but also being thoughtful about how you manage that impact over time. I think Professor highlighted some of the tensions and some examples. I think our panel highlighted examples through their various organizations of how they're doing it. You know, at the investee level, it's required, but in terms of reporting, but it's also a greater incentive for the companies overall to be impactful in the way they're thinking about success, and also really communicating their narrative, because that could potentially help them access greater levels of capital from impact organizations or investors that have an impact mandate.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. There's a comment here actually also from Frank, which I think ties in well with what you've just said, where he says we also have to change the mindset that ESG and SDG practices in general suck up money and are the things that you do after making money. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a key point. And that they really have the opportunity to provide significant financial return, and that Africa has to gain 10% GDP growth, for example, only just on gender equality, and if we could get it right. So, what you're saying about that balance and what Donald was talking about, really looking at the longer term approach to ESG and not just seeing it as a nice to do, as a bottleneck, as a pressure from regulators or law to do that, but really looking at it of where does your business want to go in the future. So thanks for that response. Donald, because I mentioned you, so maybe I'll come back to you. So Africa, like you mentioned with the CDC group, is the largest recipient of the UK development finance, taking up a share of about 60%. In your opinion, what does the private sector really need to do right to tap into this development financing? And what are the biggest mistakes the private sector are making when they're looking for financing?
Susan, that I suppose has two prongs to it. The first is really from a commercial perspective, and I'm obviously representing an ESG impact lens, but I'll talk briefly about the commercial perspective. We at CDC are often dealing with family-owned businesses of various sizes, right? Small, mid, and larger companies. And as compared with corporatized companies, these businesses in our target markets often don't have the maturity of governance systems and processes that is required to provide comfort to investors on the company's ability to achieve the commercial and the impact outcomes that a DFI like CDC and others would look for, and importantly that their investment would achieve a return for the investor, and that the investment would be safe. And a key component of the governance systems, of course, is the financial accounting and reporting systems and the statements, and whether we as investors can rely on them to give us really a true picture of the financial state of the company. So what we see often is the transparency is a key deficiency in companies we consider investing in. So it's transparency around the real state of the financial performance of the organization. Is it a going concern? What's its leverage? What are its profit margins? What liabilities does it have? All of the standard financial metrics that one would look at. The other component of it, and this also relates to ESG, is the quality of the management team. So, if they have the requisite commitment, the capacity, the willingness to partner with us in building structured governance systems, including ESG systems, then we'll certainly look at that as a more favorable investment. So that's a little bit about the governance systems. From an impact perspective, well, all of this governance includes ESG. I certainly don't like to separate ESG and sustainability issues from corporate governance. If you look at the King Code in South Africa, it's about integrated thinking, integrated reporting, very much on a holistic basis where ESG issues are incorporated into that philosophy. So from our perspective, the governance systems include ESG, business integrity, development impact, which in our markets, and I've already mentioned this, some markets are often mistakenly seen as separate antagonists of commercial success, although we see the exact opposites in many of our investments, including the small family-owned businesses and SMEs that we invest in. And so, we need to see that the company management has an ambition and a real commitment to accelerate the impact, the positive impact beyond where it currently sits, i.e. to have an additional or enhanced impact, right? So we have ESG teams, we have impact teams which address all these issues. And a very important part of our role is to support and build capacity with our investees to manage these issues in a structured and integrated way. So I've already mentioned that our legal agreements with them have specific requirements on standards that they need to achieve. And the notable one is our Code of Responsible Investing, which we are currently revising, which is also available on our website. But that refers to a range of international standards that we expect, from the IFC performance standards to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, ILO conventions, etc. And detailed action plans for them to do so are included in those legal agreements. And the last point is just an example of this, is the work that we're doing with one of our agricultural investees, which is an agricultural company operating in many countries in Africa. And what we're doing is supporting the development and execution of a comprehensive ESG management system that really looks at both the risks, but also the value creation opportunities in a very structured way, in order to make that business more efficient, more sustainable, more resilient, to save costs through resource use, etc., and comply with legal requirements. So, you know, the final point is that ultimately these actions, these ESG actions, if you're looking at the business benefit, will make the companies we invest in more attractive to other investors. So we as a DFI will exit at some stage. We want to attract other capital to these companies to make them viable into the future and to attract that capital at a lower cost. And the ESG and the governance and the impact will help that business case very substantially in our view.
Great. Thanks a lot, Donald, for expanding on that and what businesses can be doing better when they're looking for financing. Habil, apologies, I think we lost you a little bit earlier, but I would like to come to you as we've shifted the conversation now to trying to understand what is it that we need to be doing more of to really embed and deliver on sustainable finance. So you talked about the Sustainable Finance Initiative at the KBA and the progress that you're making with the 36,000 plus bank staff that have been trained, etc. From your perspective, what more is really needed in Kenya's financing sector to really move sustainable finance forward?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a very good question. I look at it from, there's something that Professor mentioned, and I was very keen because he was talking about his work in a bank. And he mentioned the fact that sustainable finance was, I think what I picked was the fact that it was being looked at from a risk management point of view. And he was proposing that we turn it around into look at it from an opportunity point of view. And indeed, if I look at where we are today, with the ravages of COVID all around us, and the fact that I think the banking sector could look at it from what professors highlighted in terms of an opportunities. And I think the opportunities for banks to embrace a green recovery strategy, certainly the place to be, and looking at it from the point of view that they should be directing the money, the funds should be directed to areas or plans that are trying to address the climate risks and as well as, of course, the social and economic inequalities in the country. And I think there lies a big opportunity for the banks. And I see that being the driving force, especially for those that are able to identify that as an opportunity. I see a lot of room for growth there. But having said that, I think one other thing that I see building up quite significant is in the green bonds area. There's a lot of work that has been put in place to develop the green bond program in Kenya. We have got the Kenya Green Bond Program, being significantly supported by the KBA, but in collaboration with other partners, the Nairobi Securities Exchange, the FSD Africa, FMO, DG, and a number of other partners that have come on board. And we are very proud of the first issue, the one of Econ Holdings, that was supported by the Kenya Green Bond Program. But the point that I think this raises is the fact that we see now room for more issues coming into the market, especially some that may be issues even by the banks themselves to try to raise resources to support their green economy development, either as individual banks or acting as in partnership with others, so they can have a club kind of deal to access the market. But more importantly, as we talk about the green bond area, there is a sovereign green bond that has been on the table for some period of time. We understand that COVID did decelerate the progress, but I think once we are out of the woods with the COVID, the sovereign green bond program, I think, will again be back on track, because the minister did mention about it in the finance, in the budget speech. So we are seeing the green bond program in Kenya picking up and being able to raise the necessary resources to be directed towards our green recovery strategy. Then the other area that I would want to mention about is we have got an initiative called the Blended Finance Project. This is where there are cases of entities that have been able to get grants from the Kenya Climate Innovation Center. And then KBA with other partners are coming in to be able to scale those projects that have shown that they are operating in that space, to be able to scale up and be able to access debt financing from the banking sector. And in there, we see a number of opportunities where they can now leverage on that to be able to even access capital from the capital markets. Other than debt, they can now access different forms of financing depending on their need at the stage of development. We also talked about KCB, and we talked about the Green Climate Fund, where entities now, given the road that has been traveled by KCB, I think that has opened the way for a number of other banks to go through the accreditation process and be able to access that funding. KCB by itself is accessing $25 million, and depending on the size of the bank, we should be able to access funds possibly in the same scale as KCB has been able to. So I think I see very good opportunities for banks to step in and play their role in supporting their clients, and especially those who are on the green economy path. And you know, for me, the sky is the limit. Thank you.
Thanks, Habil. So I think it's good to note that yeah, there are opportunities that you see evolving and that can really help move the banking sector to really embrace and deliver on sustainable finance. I'd like to come to you, Nzomo, and just ask around sustainable investment. So, you know, investing, there's the credit side, and then of course, obviously there's the investing side, and sustainable investing is an important, if I can call it, channel to gearing where money flows around sustainable development, particularly if you look at pension funds being a significant investor in the country. If Kenya is to achieve its Vision 2030, how do you see pension funds evolving in the future in a way that starts to drive sustainable investing?
Thank you. Absolutely. Pension funds have no choice but to invest sustainably going forward for a number of reasons. One, as I think Donald and the professor have said, you know, those companies that take into account ESG and other factors in their operations do deliver higher returns at the end of the day. So for pension schemes, if you want to get those high returns, you have to make sure you focus and invest in those companies. You know, the consumers don't want to buy products which have been produced in a unsustainable manner. So at the end of the day, that is, you have no choice but to go that way. Otherwise, you will not get good returns from your investment. I think number two, you know, pension schemes, you know, the money belongs to members who are part of society, and they also don't want to retire into a wasteland or you know, damage the very world that they live in. So it's also in their best interest that investments are done in sustainable companies. So I think that is the way we are going. A number of things need to be done to enable us to do so. I think a lot of focus has been on the investee side and not on the investor side. So we have all these standards and so on, which are there for companies, but you know, we don't have so much on our side. For example, as a pension scheme, I may have a deliberate policy that I want to invest in companies which meet certain standards. But how do I know that they do this? Because I can read their financial statements and they say they're doing these great things, and I can read their sustainability reports and they're saying all these things. But unless we have those assessments, which Mabinti talked about, where somebody independent has assessed that company, so that the investor knows, yes, this company is actually complying with these standards and so on, is difficult. And if you look like in the Kenyan market, you know, I know the banks are doing well, but most of the companies, even the listed companies, they don't have those kind of assessments. So as an investor, I'm really hard pressed to confirm that the company I'm investing in is actually complying. You know, so that is a challenge. I think also on the product side, Habil mentioned that we have the green bond. That's great, but we don't have much of that in the local market as well. We are also very keen on the sovereign green bond. We hope it can come because we'll be happy to invest. But we need a lot more coming to the market so that we have the sustainable investments available to us. We really appreciate, you know, some of the work done by DFIs like CDC and IFC and on, in the sense that when we know that they have done a due diligence on, you know, on a company or a project and they have invested, it gives us as pension investors comfort that you know, somebody has done this kind of independent check and it helps. So I think the more we have of that, the better it will be for us. And then the last thing I think that we really need is, you know, I mentioned we have the trust system in Kenya, so we have trustees. Trustees are not experts in finance or sustainable finance for that matter. Trustees are just ordinary workers in companies. You know, anybody can be a trustee. So, you know, we need to really expose them more to issues of sustainability, how to assess companies so that you know whether they're looking at sustainable issues and so on. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the area of training and capacity building of trustees, and even to some extent the fund managers as well.
Thank you for that. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. I am running with time and time is running so much faster. So I'm falling behind our commitment to have gone up to 3:30. So please allow me to close the panel discussion. But before I do close it, I just want to say thank you so much to all our distinguished panelists for such a timely conversation and engaging conversation. I know we don't have all the answers, but the idea was to begin understanding where we're at and getting a perspective from yourselves on where we need to be heading towards when it comes to sustainable finance. So for now, please allow me to welcome Nancy Cairo, who's the executive director, of AVPA East Africa, to give us the closing remarks. There are continuing to be some comments and chats from the audience. If any of our panelists feel like quickly posting in a question or some feedback, please feel free to do so. Nancy, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has just been a wealth of information. I wish we had 3 more hours to chat. But mine really is to thank everybody who has made this possible today, all our panelists, our keynote speaker, Professor Amaishi. He had to drop off a bit early, but I thank you all. This has really been, I think, a very fruitful discussion, and one that we as AVPA feel that it's just the beginning, really. As we had mentioned, our intention is to have at least 2 more such discussions, such webinars, and from those webinars, and from the information that we're getting from everybody in terms of the gaps in the market, we hope to be able to put out a white paper and maybe even do some research so that people have something concrete that they can take home with them and use as they implement sustainable financing approaches. AVPA, as Frank had said at the beginning, we are an ecosystem builder. We're here to help social investors really understand how they can be more effective in when they're deploying their capital, and that capital can either be financial, intellectual, or human capital. We also are part of a global growing concern. We have sister organizations in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. And so we are very, very interested in helping all of you, all of your colleagues, be able to really understand and implement sustainable financing approaches in a very effective, measurable manner. So the more that you can tell us about your needs and the challenges you're having, the better we will be in trying to provide solutions and bring more people around the table that we can discuss and share case studies and best practices. So I've put my name and my email in the chat box. For anybody who wants to reach out to me, please do. We're open to more discussions. We're open to collaborating. I see in the chat, a lot of people had questions around how can the SMEs start learning more about sustainable financing? How can they position themselves to get funding that's going towards sustainable projects? So that's an area of discussion I think we'd love to explore more. And also with the Retirement Benefits Authority, some of the gaps that you're seeing, Mr. Nzomo, around just equipping the pension schemes. We would love to explore that with you and take the discussion further and help see how we can help you achieve your goals. So I only can say thank you. Thank you so much to all the panelists, to our guest speaker, and to Susan, who was just a fabulous moderator. Thank you very much. And all those people behind the scenes who helped us put this together. Have a very nice day, morning, evening. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.